Okay, we're live.
All right, we're reconvening our morning meeting and continuing a conversation with our Fish and Wildlife Department on H230. I'm going to welcome Luke Roth.
Hi, and I'll introduce Luke if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Andrea Shortsleeve, Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. Introduce Dr. Luke Groff, who is our department herpetologist. So he's our specialist in all things amphibian and reptile. He's been with the department for about 6 years now and lives in Danby with his family. In addition to his other responsibilities, he has a doctorate from the University of Maine. And in addition to his responsibilities in the department, he is the chair of our wildlife importation and possession team, which reviews and evaluates which species may and may not be imported, possessed, or sold in Vermont. And he also has just wrapped up a 2-year stint as co-chair on the Northeast Partners for Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, which is a regional working group. It covers 13 states and the District of Columbia, and they're dedicated to the conservation of reptiles and amphibians, collaborations for those animals. So he comes to us with a lot of really great experience and really great passion. So with that, turn it over to Luke.
And actually, though, I just have a question for you.
Sure.
It's a little confusing about whether Roz is joining us today.
She won't be able to join today. She's not feeling well, and so she may be joining just to listen in. But yeah, she's
okay.
We'll be here, and if there's questions that Luke, Hannah, and I can't answer, we will take note of them and pass them to Roz. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, everybody. Good morning. For the record, my name is Luke Groff. I'm a herpetologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department and the Agency of Natural Resources. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about House Bill 230, which in part aims to protect our state's reptiles and amphibians. So here's a roadmap of the presentation. Quickly, I'll talk about some of our species, why I think herps are unique. I'll describe some of example projects currently engaged with. And lastly, we'll talk about House Bill 230. So I'll start at the beginning. Herps is short for herpetofauna, which is a term that includes all reptiles and amphibians. It's a long word, I know. That's why we have a short one for it. So here in Vermont, our herpetofauna includes our reptiles, which are our lizards, our turtles, our snakes, and our amphibians are salamanders or frogs. There's other orders around the world, but these are the 5 taxa or groups of species we have here in Vermont. So in Vermont, we have 40 native species, 19 of which are reptiles, 21 of which are amphibians. So as you can see, we have 3 endangered reptiles, 3 threatened, and 4 species of special concern. So that's 10 species, or 53% of our reptiles are considered rare, threatened, or endangered. For amphibians, we have 2 endangered, 4 special concerns. So 6 species, or 29%, are considered rare, threatened, or endangered.
Can I just pause?
Sure.
How confident are you that that's our inventory of species in Vermont? Like, how often do you add we didn't know this one was here?
Fairly confident. There's one species that comes to mind, the eastern box turtle. It's been found maybe 20 times, reported the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas around 20 times over 20 years. We've always considered those species collected, say, from Massachusetts or New Hampshire and brought here and released. Mm-hmm. But after 20 years and 20 or so reports, starting to have questions, maybe we have a native fin population.
You might add them at some point.
Potentially, I think we've got some, things to figure out before they get added. And then there's a couple species that are on our doorstep that, hopefully in my life we will have here, like the marbled salamander, hognose snake. So we're pretty confident that these are the native species we have, hopefully more in the future. So putting faces with names, these are our 8 protected species. So we have 5 endangered species and 3 threatened. The Fowler's toad is our rarest amphibian. It's restricted to the Connecticut River Basin. Right now, we know of 1 population down in very southeastern Vermont. The boreal chorus frog used to occur up in northern Lake Champlain area, has not been found, reported, heard since 1998 or 1999. So we think the species might be extirpated or locally extinct from our state. The spotted turtle, a very rare species. We only know of 3 populations across the whole state. I'll talk about that species a little later. The common five-line skink, only a couple populations in a couple towns in western Rutland County. The timber rattlesnake, very rare snake, used to occur statewide, many populations. Now we're left with 2. Both populations, again, are restricted to western Rutland County. Spiny softshell is restricted to Lake Champlain. It's a almost fully aquatic turtle, almost restricted to Lake Champlain and major tributaries. North American racer, we know of one population in southeastern Vermont. That species had not been seen since 2014. Last year, some volunteers, Jim Andrews and I, we found one individual. That was the first snake seen in 10 years. And then the eastern rat snake looks a lot like North American racer. The rat snake lives in Addison and Rutland County, so they're geographically distinct. One thing I'd like to note is that many of these species, like the soft shell, is fully aquatic almost, but a lot of these species, like timber rattlesnake, primarily restricted to protected lands, TNC lands, racer restricted to state lands, so things like that. So moving on to why I think herps are unique. First of all, they're ectothermics. So unlike a lot of our other species in taxa, reptiles and amphibians, they can't fly south for winter. They can't shiver to warm up. Their body temperature will always be the temperature of their surroundings. And because of that, they have unique adaptations, examples of how they survive winter. Some spend winters at the bottom of lakes or below the frost line. Some of our species freeze solid during the winter. Also, they have unique life history. So a lot of our species have delayed sexual maturity. Timber rattlesnakes, females don't give birth here in Vermont until 8, 9, 10 years of age. Wood turtles, females don't reproduce until 15 years of age. So they have to survive 15 years, predation, plagues, all these threats before they can even start reproducing.
Did you say 15?
15, yep. Some of our species have low reproductive output. So the spotted turtle, eastern musk turtle, they lay 2 to 3 eggs a year. These eggs will likely be predated by raccoons or other mammals in night 1 or 2. They have irregular birthing frequencies. So the timber rattlesnake, like I said, she has to go 8, 9, 10 years she has to survive before reproducing for the first time. After that, up here in Vermont, female timber rattlesnakes only reproduce every 3 to 5 years. Across all herps, it's ubiquitous that they have high egg, larvae, and juvenile mortality. So very few eggs or very few eggs make it to larvae or hatchlings or juveniles. Very few juveniles make it to adulthood. A lot of our species are slow moving. Think of turtles, salamanders. It's hard for them to get across the road in time. Specific habitat requirements. A lot of our species have very specific habitat requirements. So that salamander on my cover page, the 4-toed salamander, females lay eggs above the waterline of fishless bodies of water. So they need fishless bodies of water, like vernal pools. Above the waterline, they're looking for sphagnum, specific moss, on a hummock or a log or a rock, sphagnum, with an overhang. So the females put their eggs in the sphagnum moss, the larvae squirm out, and then they have to fall into the water below. So very specific. Fishless bodies of water, sphagnum moss, structures above the water with an overhang. And some of the consequences of these unique characteristics are small population sizes. You can have age and sex skewed populations, high mortality from things like roads, agricultural equipment, patchy distributions. So because some of these species have such specific habitat requirements and because they have low mobility, you have these patchy distributions across the landscape instead of continuous distributions. And then because those populations are distributed, there's limited movement between them. And then ultimately you can have population declines and extirpations or local extinctions. So I show this just to drive home some of the life history points. So these data are from a study in Ontario. They're relevant to Vermont. They're not relevant to, say, Florida or Georgia. So snapping turtles in Florida and Georgia can grow all year, eat all year, get bigger, and reach sexual maturity at a much earlier age. But these data are relevant to Vermont. So what I'm showing here is that female snapping turtles, 17 years they have to survive before a female can first give birth. In relation, female black bears typically give birth in year 5 and white-tailed deer in year 1. So after 17 years, you have that original female and her one clutch of eggs that she just laid, which will very likely be predated on night 1 or 2. The study estimates that nearly 1,400 snapping turtle eggs need to be laid before one of those embryos reach adulthood to reach sexual maturity. In that same 17 years, you have the original bear, 6 mature offspring and 18 immature offspring. And then you have the original deer, 628 mature offspring and 283 immature offspring. So These numbers don't account for mortality, but they do a really good job of showing the reproductive potential of certain turtles versus certain mammals. So this is using the snapping turtle as an example. You can just as easily substitute our wood turtle or a spotted turtle or some of our other late maturing turtle species. Moving on to population threats, I've listed some of the big ones here. Some of these are common across species and across taxa. Some of them are unique to herps, at least my opinion. Those are highlighted in blue, illegal collection and persecution. I'll talk about those really quickly. So illegal collection is a threat pretty specific to turtles. If you don't know, turtles are commonly collected from the wild illegally and sold in overseas markets. They're sold as status symbols, as pets. They're sold for food, jewelry, medicinal reasons, cultural and religious reasons. And the rarer a species is, the more valuable it is. And individual turtles with unique markings, the more valuable they are. So it's a huge issue. Just recently, this group, CCITT, the Collaborative to Combat the Illegal Trade in Turtle, it's a national group, actual international partners. I'm a member of it. It was formed a couple years ago, and it's comprised of state and federal biologists and state and federal law enforcement officials. Our mission is to advance efforts to better understand, prevent, and eliminate the illegal collection and trade of North America's native turtles. This figure, this graphic on the right was produced by CCITT. So this highlights some of the major confiscation events during a 4-year period between 2018 and 2022. It's not all the confiscation events, all the big ones, and it's not the small ones. So for every confiscation, for every illegal turtle bust that happens, there's countless others that go unnoticed. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. But you can see 722 eastern box turtles, 3,500 turtles in Florida, 915 box turtles in Kentucky, 220 spotted turtles. I don't even know if we have 220 spotted turtles in our state. In Georgia, nearly 6,000 loggerhead musk turtles, 743 common musk turtles, 1,500 turtles, 1,000 box turtles in Oklahoma, 4,000 turtles in Florida, 3,500 terrapins in New Jersey. These are wild numbers. Native populations can't withstand this level of take. So this is a huge issue. And if you're thinking you don't see Vermont in this list, that maybe we're immune to it, that's not the case. So I don't know if you're aware, last summer, there was a Chinese national busted by Border Patrol agents with 29 box turtles stolen from New Jersey, smuggling them from Vermont into Canada by way of Lake Wallace. She was caught. She was given 5.5 months in jail and $8,500 fines and restitution. So I'm glad she was caught, and I'm glad there were some penalties. But $8,500 is woefully inadequate. Those turtles, if they made it back to China, would have made her way more money than that. So in my opinion, I think we must do a better job of matching the penalties of illegal collection with the potential rewards.
Representative Austin.
And what is going on? Yeah, maybe when I missed
Yes.
it, the photo.
This is so when people steal turtles and they smuggle them overseas, sometimes it's mail, sometimes it's planes, different ways to smuggle them. But, so this turtle would have had its head and its limbs taped up into its shell. So there's no movement, stuffed in a box, stuffed in a carry-on, things like that.
But kept alive.
Kept alive,
Well,
maybe. Maybe.
But the
So-
goal is to keep it alive.
The goal is to keep it alive, certainly. But of those 29 box turtles that were taken from Jersey last summer, at least 2 have already died. When you put turtles, many turtles in a small space, they get stressed, they share diseases, they often don't make it. It's years before we can find out where they're from and if they're releasable.
where are those turtles now?
Those turtles, when they were confiscated, were taken to a holding facility in Massachusetts. And that's the last I heard of them. So I believe Border Patrol I know New Jersey is in contact and they want them back, but it's a long process before those turtles get repatriated into the wild.
But they were confident they're all kind of from New Jersey and could be
She admitted to
rewilded.
She admitted that they were taken from New Jersey. Yeah.
Is she a trustworthy witness?
I haven't spoken to her. What I know is from there's a paper that did a pretty in-depth 3-article synopsis of this, and apparently she was working with law enforcement.
Yeah.
Their sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
other threat. Okay, another threat that's unique to herps, mostly snakes, is fear and persecution. So from an early age, the movies we watched, the fables we've read, the children's stories, they taught us to be afraid of snakes, that they're vile and mean and dangerous, and that snakes should be feared and killed. And I get it, snakes are different. They don't have arms, they don't have legs, they move different, they don't have eyelids, so they don't blink. In my opinion, that's one of the things that makes them cool. And I would much rather have some healthy snake populations around the house than healthy mice populations in the house or pests in my garden. Moving on to some example projects. So above the line are some example research and monitoring projects that the department is currently engaged with. Below the line are some example collaboration and partnerships that we're currently engaged with. And I'm going to highlight two: soft shell nest protection and spotted turtle distribution. So the Spiny Soft Shell Distribution Nest Protection Project. This is our longest term herp project in the state. It was originally started by Steve Perrin in 2004. The field portion is now run by Tony McCula, shown here in the bottom left. The goals of the project are to protect spiny soft shell nests, monitor annual reproduction, and conserve and improve nesting habitat. So every year at 3 to 4 of our most important nesting beaches, we do these actions on the right. So we clear nesting beaches after the winter. We remove all the beach wrack and all the debris that are hindering nesting females. We install wire mesh panels across the entire beaches. Once the females are done nesting, we install multiple layers of exclusion fencing, one of which is electrified. We count nests, we count hatchlings once the emergence period happens. And then every year we collect a subset of hatchlings, typically around 20, and deliver them to Echo Leahy Center for Lake Champlain. They head start these turtles, which means that they care for these turtles all winter. They're fed, they grow. So when they're released in the summer, those head started hatchlings are a much bigger size than the hatchlings that spent the winter in the bottom of Lake Champlain. So in the turtle and herp world, a larger size corresponds with greater survival. That's why we do that.
How many, if you take 20, how many do you think remain while not head started?
So I had a slide about that. So over the last 3 years, 22 to 2024, there's about 3,200 hatchlings produced. So maybe say 1,000 a year, small fraction of that.
And what's it? Well, if you're going to keep talking about it, I won't ask questions.
Sure. Yeah. The next slide, maybe build off of that. I just want to iterate, this project aims to protect our spiny soft shell, our state threatened species, but other turtle species benefit from our efforts. So painted turtles, our official state reptile, eastern musk turtles, snapping turtles, and northern map turtles all benefit from this project.
How is that?
Because we're protecting this. So these beaches are not just spiny soft shell beaches, they're communal nesting beaches. So all those species will nest there. Yep.
Representative Bartholomew.
They get, when they hatch, how do they get out of the water? It's on top.
I'm sorry?
There's wire on top of the net to protect the nest. When they hatch,
Great
how do they
question.
get out? Whoa.
So the spacing of that wire mesh grid is big enough for the hatchlings to escape, small enough for the predators, mostly small enough for the predators to do. So the two biggest threats to our spiny soft shell populations are predation and flooding. So despite all the efforts that I just told you about that we do every year, exclusion fencing, wire meshing, predators still take nests. So during the last 20 years, 2004 to 2024, every year between 27 to 79% of the soft shell nests are predated, despite our efforts. And this picture on the right, this is one of our most important spiny soft shell nesting beaches. This is usually a spit of land that's not underwater. This picture was taken during the July 2023 flooding event. This is where the spiny soft shells nested this beach. This beach this year produced no hatchlings. It was a total wash for the species.
Who are the
Representative Austin.
predators?
So when we're talking about predation, and we're usually talking about nest predation for this project. So we're talking about mostly raccoons, possums, skunks, and fox. Big predators.
Moose.
Mostly raccoons.
Moose.
I did not say moose. No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said moose. I was
Fox,
like, what?
possum, raccoon, and fox.
Thanks.
You bet. This slide just summarizes 20 years of data. So up here, I have just the last 3 years of data. So 2022 to 2024, you can see, despite our efforts, 48% of spiny softshell nests were still predated, but they still produced 3,200 hatchlings. Here's the number of successful nests, number of live hatchlings produced over 20 years. You can see we're trending in the right direction. Our efforts are making a difference, but we still have these low years, and those are associated with high predation years, flooding years, and early cold snaps.
Is the population increasing?
So the data we have is nesting data. So we don't have data on adults. They're out in Lake Champlain. It's really hard to study them. But based on the reproduction and the recruitment, I would assume yes, but I don't have hard data. The second project I want to highlight is the Spotted Turtle Distribution Project. Currently in year 2 or 3 of this project. It's a collaborative project involving the University of Vermont, the Orion Society, the USGS Vermont Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, the Smithsonian, and the US Fish and Wildlife Service. So myself and these 3 individuals represent the core team of the project. This is Anila Colonia, a graduate student at UVM, Dr. Brittany Mosier, professor at UVM and Anila's advisor, and Kylie Briggs, director of conservation at the Orion Society. The goals of this project were to find new spotted turtle populations and better understand the species distribution. The motivation for the project was knowing that we only have 3 known spotted turtle populations across the whole state. One is in Windham County, one is in Bennington County, and one is in Addison County. So very widely distributed, over 100 miles between 2 of the populations, with presumably lots of suitable habitat in between. So we were hoping to find new populations out there waiting to be found. This species was listed as threatened in 1989, upgraded, downgraded to endangered in 1999. So this is a schematic of our objectives for the study. So we wanted to develop a statewide habitat suitability model. We wanted to develop best practices for eDNA sampling and analysis. We wanted to conduct multi-method surveys at the sites best predicted by our model. Presumably, we were hoping to find a lot of spotted turtle populations, and then at spotted turtle populations that needed a helping hand, we were going to implement some habitat management actions. If you don't know what eDNA is, that stands for environmental DNA, and basically that means collecting environmental samples like soil, scat, water, air, collecting samples like that, and then analyzing them for the DNA of your target species. So in our case, we collected water samples, and the Smithsonian Institute analyzed them for trace amounts of spotted turtle DNA, which could have come from carcasses, feces, urine, shed skin cells, things like that. This is a very cryptic species, very small species, very cryptic species. Very hard to survey for, so I think this is probably our best shot. eDNA is probably our best shot to find new populations.
When you say small, how small?
4 or 5 inches as adults, things like that. And the 3 populations that we know of, 2 of them are really thin. One population, we only know of 4 individuals. So we're talking really thin, small populations that are hard to find. So 3 years, the team really worked really hard, especially Anila, the graduate student on this project, worked really hard. She created a statewide predictive model. We conducted eDNA sampling at unknown potential sites. 6 of those. So that was year 2, that was 2024. This doesn't account for year 3 or year 1, 2023. eDNA had not been used on the species before, so we had to develop protocols by sampling known sites across 3 states. The Smithsonian had to develop analysis protocols. So all that's behind the scenes work. We conducted trapping, baited trapping, live trapping at 18 sites, and we conducted camera trapping at 8 sites. So after all this work, what do we have to show for ourselves? Fortunately, we did not find any new spotted turtle populations, but we did develop effective eDNA collection protocols, and the Smithsonian Institute developed effective eDNA analysis protocols. So I will soon be purchasing one of these eDNA samplers. They're not cheap, but we will continue to sample unknown sites, potential sites, and hopefully, in my mind, it's just a matter of time until we find new populations. Also, because we didn't do the habitat management part of the project, in lieu of that, we've been talking with a landowner about purchasing, permanently conserving 40 acres of spotted turtle habitat. And then some land trust partners we're working with, they've been working with the landowner as well to conserve hundreds of more acres surrounding spotted turtle habitat.
In all three places?
Just at one of our sites. So one of our sites. So last section I have is talking about House Bill 230. So this slide provides an overview of the legislative policy proposals in the bill that pertain to reptiles and amphibians. So that's why I'm here, the reptile and amphibian part. So in my mind, there's sort of 4 buckets of policy proposals that I showed here, and I'll go into each one of those a little bit. So the proposals associated with Chapter 10, Section 4085 are partially aimed at a specific invasive species, the pond slider. So the pond slider is native to southeastern US and northeastern Mexico. Think Mississippi River drainage. There's 3 subspecies, the red-eared slider, which this is. There's also a yellow-bellied slider and a Cumberland slider. The red-eared slider is the most common species bought, traded, sold in the legal pet trade around the world. Because of that, it's also the most commonly released turtle across the world. There's non-native invasive populations established in dozens of countries and in almost every US state outside of their native range. So currently, pond sliders are allowed to be imported, possessed, sold, etc. in Vermont, but released and escaped sliders spread diseases and they outcompete our native species for limited resources. The Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas has received 22 reports from 16 towns since 2000. And anecdotally, I should mention, so I just got done saying how rare the spotted turtle is, how important that species is. Last spring, we found a red-eared slider in one of our few spotted turtle wetlands, which was cause for alarm for us. So despite 22 reports, we still don't know of any established populations in Vermont. I'm not saying there aren't any. We don't know of any. We follow up on reports and we conduct trapping to see. We've got some work coming planned with UVM this spring to do some trapping at a site in Winooski. So this proposed bill, if passed, would allow our commissioner to restrict non-native species that pose threats to our native species ecosystems. And it would allow pet owners to keep non-native species that were legally obtained before they became restricted. So right now, so like I said, our commissioner said, I chair the department's wildlife importation and possession team. As a herpetologist and as chair of that team, it bothers me that we allow this turtle in Vermont. But right now, there's hundreds, if not thousands of these turtles in houses across Vermont. So if we would restrict it tomorrow, we're not interested in taking people's beloved pets from them. But we also don't want them to release these turtles into our rivers, streams, ponds, and lakes. So this proposed bill would essentially establish a land grandfather or legacy clause that would allow people that currently have sliders to keep them once they become restricted.
I'm curious if are those pets legally obtained or are they illegally taken from the place this turtle is from?
They're legally obtained. So this is the most common species. So it's commonly bred for the pet trade. Other states, Maine, New Jersey, I believe Florida, Connecticut, they have already outlawed the species, sale and possession of the species. So other states are moving that way. We're one of the few states now that doesn't have an established population. So hopefully we can keep that up. The other part of Chapter 10, Section 4085 would protect non-T&E species. So right now, threatened and endangered species are legally protected. Non-threatened and endangered herps may be taken with either a hunting or a fishing license, depending on the method of take. So currently there are no seasons, no limits, no reporting requirements, but no restrictions on the number of animals that can be taken for non-T&E herps. So one thing I want to say is the wood turtle. This is a species of special concern here in Vermont. It's not a threatened species. It's not an endangered species. So wood turtles can be harvested in any number with a hunting and fishing license. The wood turtle is also being considered right now for federal listing under the Endangered Species Act. Word on the street is the species will be federally listed, and then it'll become state listed, and then it'll have protections. But until that happens, anybody can purchase species in any numbers right now. And I will also point out that reptiles and amphibians are not included, as far as I know, are not included in the wanton waste bill. in the wanton waste law, so there's no expectation for killed herps to be recovered or used. So, when I talk about this, I often give people the example of people shooting turtles for target practice. I'm often asked if, does that actually happen? I think it does happen. I've found turtle shells with what appear to be bullet holes in them. Jim Andrews, the director of the Vermont Reptile Amphibian Atlas, has found turtle shells with what appear to be bullet holes in them. And 2 weeks ago, I was listening to a federal wetlands biologist here in the state give a presentation, and he was talking about a site up in northeastern Vermont, where he's continually getting calls from concerned citizens about people stopping in a road to shoot at turtles on logs. So it does happen. So if this bill is passed, it would allow us to prohibit the take and possession of certain reptile amphibian species and regulate the take or regulate the harvest of other species. So it would allow us essentially to establish guardrails on the harvest of select species, such as other game species. We could establish harvest seasons, we could establish daily season and possession limits, appropriate methods of take. We could finally establish reporting requirements, restrict harvest based on sex, age, maturity. So snapping turtles are currently harvested. If this is one of the species that continues to be harvested, I could imagine no restriction on not taking females during the nesting season. I could imagine a restriction. So for snapping turtles, they've got to live 17 years to start reproducing. And then as they get older, they get bigger and larger. Older females can produce more eggs. So the oldest females are the most important population. So I could imagine a restriction where only males are allowed to be harvested or young females. And I just want to be clear, like, any species that's identified as a harvestable species would be done in consultation with the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Scientific Advisory Group. I would hope that there'd be a public input process. And I imagine, depending on how the conversations go in the bill, anywhere from 0 to 3 species being harvestable. The rest of the species would have closed seasons and not be harvested. So chapter 10, section 4709. So right now, it's not clear whether existing transport, import, and possession restrictions apply to native reptiles and amphibians. So this bill would just clarify that yes, reptiles and amphibians are one of the species covered by the existing restrictions. It would also clarify that native herps can't be taken, collected, exported, sold for commercial purposes without authorization. And the same is true that they can't be collected, sold, exported for personal reasons unless authorized. So it's just clarifying language. Chapter 8, section 5403. So currently under this section, I believe only the take, possession, and transport of T&E wildlife and wild plants is restricted. If passed, our proposals would make it clear that T&E, threatened and endangered species, can't be imported into Vermont or exported out of Vermont. And they can't be sold, delivered, transported, shipped, etc. within the state. And then chapter 10, sections 5408 and 5410. So currently, Act 250, section 48, threatened and endangered species takings permits, they require certain projects require a public input process. So currently, the names and locations of threatened and endangered species are disclosed during these public input processes. I just talked about illegal collection and the big concern there. So illegal collectors are not dumb. They know that there's publicly available information out there. So they look at websites, they look at social media, they look at publicly available documents, white papers, research articles, and they use those to identify rare species populations so that they can target their illegal collection efforts. So we're essentially creating a roadmap for illegal collection when we advertise some of these species locations. So if this bill would pass, it would allow the ANR secretary to avoid disclosing the names and locations of certain TA species during public input processes. And we're not talking about all species. We're talking about species that are vulnerable to illegal collection, commercial trade, human caused mortality or persecution, and habitat destruction. So we're talking about spotted turtles. We're talking about timber rattlesnakes, species like that. And that's all I had for you. Happy to take any questions and try and answer them if you have them.
Thank you. That was a great presentation that you took a lot of time with it. Representative Austin and then Chapin.
During the public input process, are other sites identified? I mean, wouldn't someone just listen to what site is not identified? You know what I mean?
Sure. So typically, for the public to have a appropriate understanding of a project, it's typically described where the project is. And then, with threatened and endangered species permits, there's a permit for certain species. So they're getting the name and they're getting the name from the permit, and they're getting the location from the project.
So the public would not have access to that location.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's keeping that location, species names confidential for a subset, for an important subset.
Yeah,
of our
no,
species. Yeah.
I understand the rationale. This-
Representative Chapin.
Thanks for your presentations, really detailed, and just appreciate that. I just have been really surprised that that these protections and management options don't already exist in Vermont. We've known for decades and decades that a lot of these species are particularly sensitive, and a lot of the science that you just shared about why the populations are so sensitive to shifts and habitat and how they're managed can you comment on, are many states missing these protections? Like, how did we get here? And I just feels like we should be doing the same like we do for rare plants and mammals and others.
I agree. Thank you for that, saying that. I agree. So I don't have a whole lot of years here. I've been here 6 years. I was also surprised to learn that some of our species are not protected. Protections across states vary widely, but I will say right now there's a big push to protect turtles and to further protect TNE species and common species, because if common species aren't protected, maybe they're going to be the next TNE species. So there's a couple states I'm involved that I know of that are going through rulemaking processes, like Louisiana. So I think this is becoming more considered. Hopefully it's something that I think is important.
Have our neighboring states already made these changes or enacted these protective provisions?
It's a great question. I don't know that answer. I can get back to you with that. As far as the slider information goes, I know Maine, Connecticut, two of our close neighbors have restricted species already. But as far as the other protections, I'm not sure.
Further questions?
Just-
Representative Austin.
Yep. Are they taken for food or are they taken to sell?
Turtles?
Yeah.
All sorts of reasons. Food, jewelry, pets is a big one. So in overseas markets, like having a rare turtle from the US, especially one with unique markings, it's a status symbol. Medicinal reasons like aphrodisiacs. Some people believe that ground up turtles are an aphrodisiac. And then cultural and religious release. So there's a whole slew of reasons.
So, interestingly, you mentioned that the fine and jail time that person is subjected to was that from whose law was she prosecuted under for the?
Was prosecuted here in Vermont. That's all I can say.
I believe it was federal, but I'm not sure. I can get back to
It
you.
wasn't through you all, or you would know, right? But what would, if you could tell us, what would lining those penalties up look like, or how would we get a handle on that? And are our penalties lined up? We're just looking at penalties.
Well, I think the way that the language currently would penalize these is similar to the threatened and endangered species violations. So there would be a fine. It would be treated as an administrative violation. So you would be issued a civil ticket, not criminal, although I can double check.
I mean, if you were caught collecting Vermont herps to sell, I'd be curious what that fine is and whether or not it's lined up from, you said, we can't do anything about the federal level, but could we do something in Vermont?
Yeah, it does point to the violation set forth in section 4518, which I believe deals with both the big game and threatened and endangered species violations. And then it also states that a violator may be required to pay additional penalties based on reasonable mitigation and potential economic benefit associated with commercial trade. That would be something we would have to establish in terms of determining mitigation. The department does have broad authority right now to mitigate for impacts to habitat and TNE species. I think it would sort of be transferable here, but we would have to determine how that's done during the rulemaking process.
And then back to the painted turtle, are you, despite having not found any new populations, would it be, I don't know, helpful to educate landowners who had the type of habitat that they need? Are you doing any of that?
So the spotted turtle,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. So two of our populations occur mostly or at least partially on state land. The third population is totally private land. So we do some outreach down there. We have some really great landowners nearby that keep an eye out on the population and report to them. At least several of the turtles in that population were reported from nearby residents.
I guess I'm saying in totally other places that have the characteristics you would anticipate them needing. Is it?
I believe we have done a social media post, so it's something I put into presentations. But
I think we have biologists who work primarily with private landowners who are invited to their properties to walk around and talk about habitat and stuff. And I think this is a great opportunity. You're highlighting a great opportunity to talk to our biologists and just kind of like tune them into this a little bit more,
Yeah.
keep their eyes out. And, we do a lot of outreach with consulting and county foresters about a lot of different things. And this would also be another good opportunity to work with them.
Yeah, and I mean, Vermonters are out in the landscape looking, so a few people looking is one thing, but more people looking, you find them and maybe you'll find them in other locations. Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have several groups that do water testing around the state, voluntary groups. Are they reporting in sighting of any of these animals? Is
Not
there
to
a
the
coordinated
department.
effort
not that I know of.
to spread the word out there?
Yeah, I agree. The more we can get the word out, the better. But no, I don't know of any reports from the water group.
Right, thank you again for your presentation.
That's great.
Members, we will be coming back to committee at 2:00 with Michael O'Grady. Did he send in a latest draft? Okay, so look for the latest draft of the fluoride bill, the one we're working on. So we're talking about 3 different bills right now. And we'll seek you back here